Hello and welcome. I'm Peter Kelly from 3plus and I'll be sharing the Queensland Media Club MC duties today with Claire Barnes from Channel 10. I welcome David Crisafulli MP, Leader of the Opposition and Shadow Minister for Tourism, who will address the club today for the first time. I also welcome a number of Shadow Ministers, MPs and councillors, including Krista Adams, Deputy Mayor, and Council's new 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games Chair. I acknowledge and pay my respects to the Agga and Turrbal people, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We're able to present these events only with the support of our partners, and I'd like to acknowledge them. Our naming rights partners for the new season of the Queensland Media Club is Brisbane Airport Corporation, operator of the Brisbane Airport, the multi-award winning premier gateway to Queensland. Dial Before You Dig, a national referral service for information on the location of utilities underground assets anywhere in Australia. And Griffith University, created to be a different kind of university and currently ranked in the top 15 on the Olympic medal tally, given that their student Zach Stubblety-Cook is our newest Olympic medalist with the 200 breaststroke gold shortly before we started, Emma McKeon, another student at Griffith. Please thank our naming rights sponsors. The Chamber of Commerce and Industry Queensland is one of our seasoned partners. They're powering the business potential of Queensland through advocacy, day-to-day support and specialist help. They're partnered with Technology One, Australia's leading ERP software as a service provider. Their products transform businesses and make life simpler. Our club partners are Remondis, a global leader in waste management with more than 800 plants across 30 countries. Remondis plans to bring that experience to Queensland, specifically to Ipswich, and invest in an energy from waste facility to encourage recycling and limit the environmental impacts of landfill. And Telstra, connecting millions of people every day, supporting communities and their passions, helping small businesses thrive, and connecting schools to the world. Australia is at the centre of everything Telstra does. Please thank our season and club partners. Our venue partner is the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre, Brisbane's premier venue for events of all types and sizes, and an EarthCheck Platinum certified leader of innovation and sustainability in the sector. And finally, the managers of the Queensland Media Club, 3plus, who are specialists in risk and reputation management, as well as strategic communications.
My name is Claire Barnes. I'm from the 10 Network. My colleagues and I are taking a very brief break from budget estimates to be here, so let's get into the main event. As I'm sure most of you are aware, David Crisafulli is Queensland's opposition leader and Shadow Minister for Tourism. David was born and bred in Ingham in North Queensland, the son of sugarcane farmers and small business owners. He started his career in the noblest of professions, as a journalist in Townsville, and things have gone downhill since. David was first elected to State Parliament 9 years ago, where he was appointed the Minister for Local Government, Community Recovery and Resilience. He lost his seat in 2015 and along with many of his colleagues, he then turned to the private sector. He established a small business providing planning and government strategy advice and relocated his family to the northern end of the Gold Coast, where he was re-elected to State Parliament in 2017 as the member for Broadwater. During the previous term, David served as the opposition spokesperson for the environment, science, Great Barrier Reef and tourism. Following the 2020 state election, David, of course, was elected as opposition leader, where he continues to serve as its spokesperson for tourism. Since that elevation, he's talked about the LNP's need to undertake monumental reform, part of which was achieved at the LNP State Convention on the weekend. He declared his wish to diversify the party and pre-select candidates from a great array of backgrounds for the next state election, which is setting up to be one of the true tests of his leadership. So can you join me now in welcoming to the stage the Leader of the Opposition, David Crisafulli.
Thank you very much, Claire. To distinguished guests, members of Parliament, both State, Deputy Mayor, sponsors one and all. I've been asked today to talk about reform and relevance, and I start by acknowledging how challenging these times are that we live in. But it's not just the relevance and the ability to reform politically, that's the case for everybody. And it would be wrong of me to stand up today, and I'm going to share some insights into that process, but if I wasn't fair income and willing to raise how challenging these times have been for others outside the political process and the media process, I'd be doing you all a great disservice. In the last 48 hours, I've spoken with business owners from either end of the state, people in tourism specifically, in that adventure experience, and they are on their knees. And the uncertainty at the moment in business, and I acknowledge it's feast or famine, some are doing incredibly well. But the uncertainty at the moment is real, and the uncertainty for families wanting to connect with loved ones is real. So the commentary I make today about how it impacts on politics, sure, it's important for our ilk, but out in the big bad world there are other challenges afoot. This uncertainty, in my mind, has led to a case of the population across the nation yearning for vision and yearning for a bit of certainty. And I think the days of I'm rusted on red team or I'm only the blue team are over. People are looking for the maroon team. This is the maroon challenge we have at the moment. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my vision for the state before I talk about reform and relevance. And you'll be pleased to know the speech I talk about, the vision I have, would be exactly the same if I was delivering it here or at the Rural Press Club. And there's been enough dividing of the state over the years. So I have no dramas walking into this room and talking about my vision for agriculture. And Michael, it's great to have you here from AgForce today. Agriculture to me is an industry of opportunity. Farmers just need certainty in land tenure, and they need certainty in water supply, and they need to be held to the highest environmental standards. But with those factors in the mix, there is an opportunity to drive agriculture for a generation. I'm as happy talking to you here today about mining as I am in Moranbah, because the Queensland economy and those regional towns are underpinned by it. But it has to be a mining industry that's flexible, adapts to changing commodities as demand for others will rise and fall, and it has to be a mining industry that sets a benchmark for the way that it conducts itself both environmentally but also with workers' rights and safety. Has to be at the forefront of all we do. And I'm as happy to talk to you here about a tourism industry and using our natural assets as I am in Cairns. And the tourism industry I see in Queensland is one that's built on using what makes us great. And there was a period where we dreamed big in tourism. And not everything that was done in that era was right, but it was a time when we were prepared to use our natural assets to create an offering that people were proud of. And I have seen other states, like Tasmania, and other nations like New Zealand, use their environmental assets in a respectful way, but a way that's driven economic opportunities, and I'm determined to do it here. But likewise, I'll go to the other end of the state and I'll talk about my view and my vision for South East Queensland, where advanced manufacturing is at the forefront of all we do, where we have an aggressive business relocation strategy, where we talk seriously about international education and what it means for here, and where we talk about infrastructure delivery for the southeast of the state, which is why I haven't sought to play politics when it comes to the Olympic Games. And I know the politics of it outside of the southeast. I can tell you it's difficult, and that's why there have been those who have sought to weaponise it, and I'm not going to do that. But for it to be truly monumental, for it to be truly long-lasting, we need to be serious about making it a Games for everyone and for it to be a focus on not just a couple of week window. And so it is I use tourism as an example, and the fact that I've kept that in my shadow portfolio, I hope sends a signal to people that it's a great opportunity for us. We are a state of opportunity that's not just based on commodity, but based on experience. But if we're truly going to make the Olympic Games something special, we need a tourism vision for this state, the envy of the world. And I look across the country at the moment and I see 10-year visions for the federal government, for New South Wales, for the Northern Territory. The Victorian government's already released a 5-year plan on the back of COVID. We currently have outdated plans in things like tourism and transport, and indeed in ecotourism. Outdated, superseded from 2020. I don't want to see a 10-year vision. I want to see a 20-year vision for tourism in this state. And if we are serious, 2032 will not be the finish line. It will be the midway point in our push for gold for Queensland's economy. So what does that mean? That means for the next decade, developing the kind of product that puts us at the cutting edge of tourism. Being bold, being respectful, using our Indigenous heritage, using our natural environment to drive an offering like we've never seen before. That involves a window in the middle, just before, during and after the games, where people come here and we fill up those hotels, those bars, create the party atmosphere, and then after, instead of the hangover, a decade of the world knowing who we are and making sure that Queensland is at the forefront of all we do. I want to talk briefly about what I believe will be our path to victory before I get on to talking about reform and relevance, and that is to make sure that everything I talk about is based along the following: economy, service delivery, and transparency. And I've spoken about the economy and those factors that will unite North and South. Let me tell you a little bit about service delivery. Our political opponents will seek to frame us as not being interested in it. And I understand that, that's politics. But what I intend to do is highlight that service delivery in this state is not at the level that it should be. It's not at the level that people deserve. And I'll share why across 3 platforms. In the health space, we heard a lot in 2010-11 about Queensland Health, and we heard a lot from the then Premier saying it was a basket case. Well, if you compare the metrics today, Queensland Health is performing more poorly than it was a decade ago. And Ros Bates, the Shadow Health spokesperson, who's in the room today, has done a marvellous job going around the state talking to people about ways that we could do better, and we've put our plans forward. But ambulance ramping in that era was 30%. Today, it's at 40%. Elective surgery in that era was at 55,000 people, and today it continues to go north. And the dental waiting list, which was at 60,000, is now at 150,000. Law and order, we've seen the growth in police numbers not keep pace with population growth. We've seen a weakening of laws that has led to communities like the one I used to live in Townsville, where I have friends who tell me when they're driving at night, even when the light's green, they look both ways for fear of someone coming through that intersection. I have had friends in those car accidents hit by people in a vehicle while out on bail. And I know that there's more we can do. And I look at housing, and everything you're seeing with housing is a direct correlation between a lack of infrastructure delivery and a lack of planning to bring things to market. What I'm talking about here is by all means the platform for us to succeed electorally. But without reform, we have no chance at all of the public looking at us and treating us as a viable alternative. People have asked me what's the inside story on the reform of my side of politics. And all of you would know, you have bought your tickets well before the weekend, so I put a lot on the line. But the reform of my side of politics is essential if we are to ever succeed. Because for some reason, people vote for us here at a Brisbane City Council level, and they vote for other people of my side of politics in other councils across the state. They vote for us federally. So the issue isn't Queenslanders, the issue has been ourselves and our ability always to cannibalise ourselves and find ways to lose elections. And I'm determined to make that stop. Reform isn't easy, but it's not rocket science either. I have no intention of walking away from our past, but I do have an intention of setting a new course for the future. What does that inside story look like? Well, in the short time that I've been Leader of the Opposition, in between doing my normal day-to-day job, going to Parliament, talking to many of you, I've attended over 100 meetings of the party. That's an average of about 3 a week. There's been a lot of nights away. I've had meetings in workshops, in boardrooms, at the end of a jetty, wherever party members have been willing to meet, I have met with them. And I've been determined to make sure that the changes that they want to see to their constitution and their organisation were delivered. And I make it very clear, this has never been about personalities for me, and I have no intention of making it so. But the members did speak on the weekend to that structural reform and indeed to some changes in the personnel-wise. And I acknowledge today Lawrence Springborg here as President. Lawrence is someone who's had a great interest in the LNP. He's the father of it. And for him to be willing to put his hand up long after his time in public life at a state level is finished shows a great desire to serve. Likewise, the choice of the two vice presidents, two articulate, strong, business-minded women from either end of the state, Natalie Marr and Amanda Cooper, who will help drive a push where the organisation and its elected officials know their roles and responsibility, where it's built on respect and trust, where we can build on the great work of those who have come before us and take things to the next level. More needs to be done, and in her introduction, Claire mentioned about those candidates. Reform means nothing unless we reform to the outside world as well. And I'm determined to be held personally accountable for what happens in the selection of our candidates. That's not me imposing my will. That's not me talking about quotas. That's me talking about a party that looks and sounds like modern Queensland, a centre-right political movement where the economy will matter, and so too will the environment, where opportunity and aspiration will count for something, but so too will a society that looks after those who can't look after themselves. And in order to be held accountable, I've set a target for more women in winnable seats, more parents, more people running small businesses who are given the flexibility to continue to do that and use their experience in campaign, more people from multicultural backgrounds, more people who are Indigenous and or Torres Strait Islanders. And so that it can't be trickery and I pick examples of people in unwinnable seats, politics is a game of numbers. So I'm committing to you that that breadth of talent will come from the top 14 most marginal seats. We need 14 seats to govern with a strong workable majority, and that's where I intend to focus my energy in attracting people to want to run for our side of politics and be part of the generational change that this state desperately needs. So I've spoken about reform, now it's time to talk about relevance. And as somebody pointed to me after the weekend, all you've done is got your house in order, so it's now time for people to look at you and see whether or not what you're saying is tangible. We've just cleared the decks and given us the best chance of winning, but it's time now to start talking to Queenslanders about what matters to them. We live in a very difficult and different time, and I spoke about the challenges before. It's a time when both opposition and you in the media have been on strange terms when it comes to disseminating information and critiquing that information. And in many ways, both oppositions and media, we're linked at the hip. Our job is to hold the government to account. Sure, ours is to put up alternate visions, but at the core of what we do is making sure that a good democratic system can work with accountability. And you know my style, it's always one that if something is right, I'll say it. If I disagree with it, I'll do so in a forceful manner and put forward an alternate view. But pandemic politics has been tough. In many ways, we've laid down our tools, and it's almost been the view that to critique things, particularly early on in the pandemic, was very difficult because it's viewed almost as being against that maroon challenge that I outlined at the start. And power, and indeed the messaging, has been unfiltered, unchecked, unchallenged. And when lives are on the line, you can understand that. But we're now moving into a new normal. And increasingly, as we see, particularly our friends overseas who've been through far more challenging times than us, we're seeing what that new normal looks like. And as a result, we will return to some greater level of scrutiny. And so we should. But at risk of sounding a little provocative, I get the sense in Queensland that some of our rule makers aren't comfortable with that. And I'm seeing that in behaviour, both in the Parliament, in the community, and during press conferences. Because when a government starts determining how long every press conference should go for, you've got every right to ask questions. And when the press conference structure can only be a certain way, and when the breadth of topics can only be a certain amount of topics, when a journalist is asking questions, as they should be, but they're told that they're being rude or that they didn't attend the day before, so that somehow made them less worthy to ask a question, or when towards the end of every press conference I hear the words, "Sorry, we got to go," I question whether or not the compass needs to be turned back a little bit to that pre-pandemic politics level. Questions unanswered or questions answered deliberately incorrectly concern me. And let me give you some examples from the RTI process, where a journalist who asks a question is told that they can't be given that information because it could be misleading to the community. Well, that's wrong. When the question about whether or not an RTI officer has already withheld more information than the Office of the Information Commissioner would allow, that's not what a democratic process looks like. When the government signature project, Cross River Rail, has different amounts buried in different departments so that the scrutiny can't be put onto what it's going to cost and when it's going to be delivered, that's not accountable government. We no longer have a productivity commission operating independently. Our estimates process, which we'll all be heading back to shortly, is a farce. And I haven't just called it out, I've said what we're going to do to change it. And Fiona Simpson is here today as our shadow spokesperson for integrity. I'm deadly serious about it, and I intend to have that as a ministry as well. And at the top of the list will be reforming that estimates process, as will the establishment of a parliamentary budgetary office so that policies can be scrutinised, costed, so that the true state of the books can be independently assessed 6 weeks before an election. And so all members, including the crossbench and minor parties, are able to have their policies costed and put forward to the people of Queensland. I'm also seeing a tendency for behaviour that I say is hypocritical in nature. And again, when it's raised, it's almost as though you're raising criticism against the flag or criticism against an event. Queenslanders weren't angry about the Premier's trip to Tokyo. They saw a hypocrisy of 2 weeks of an assault on anyone in business who wanted to bring someone to meet a skills shortage in their industry. People weren't critical about the attendance of the opening games ceremony. It was the charade that we saw to try and manufacture an excuse to double down on a promise that you didn't want to keep. That's what matters. And that deserves to be called out, because that is the behaviour when a government starts treating people in a third term differently to what they did in their first. And I say again, the compass has to come back a little bit towards probing questions in a free and democratic society. Relevance has never been more difficult, and I understand that that will continue to be a challenge for some time. But I'm not going to change my style. I will not bark at every car that goes past. I will not stray from those issues that I spoke about at the start: the economy, service delivery and transparency. And I understand at times that'll disappoint people, because people will see opportunities for us to score political points, and of course that's part of the process, but I intend to strike a vision and a tone that makes people look at us and see that we will be ready in 2024. That economy will be one based on embracing the bush and the city, as I said. It'll be an economy for purpose, and there's no chance that our first economic policy was about social enterprise. It's something that our Shadow Treasurer, David Janetsky, is personally very passionate about. It's not something you'd normally see from a Liberal National Party, but it matters. It matters to give everyone the opportunity to have a crack at a job. And I intend to make service delivery at the core of what we talk about. Not about cuts to services, about how we can deliver a service that makes Queenslanders proud. And when I talk about partnering with the private sector to meet targets in things like health, that's not about replacing the public sector, that's about the private sector working side by side to deliver the level of service that Queenslanders will feel proud of. And when I talk about transparency, I talk about a parliament for everyone, but a government that is prepared to reform, but with humility and decency, and take people on a journey and explain the sort of Queensland that we want to build. Friends, free from talking about ourselves, now is the opportunity. We are reformed, and we will show why we will be relevant. That makes us a better opposition, and in time it will make us a better government. And that's not about the red team, that's not about the blue team, that's about the maroon team, and a maroon vision that all of Queensland can be proud of. Thank you very much for having me.
There's a lot to unpack there. Is that on? Can we hear me? Yep, okay. You mentioned relevance, which I wanted to touch on first. How, though, do you increase your relevance, A, in a pandemic, and B, up against a third-term Premier?
By being consistent and not looking for cheap headlines. And I know that won't excite a lot of people, but I think the tendency has always been in opposition, you just do absolutely anything you can to try and be relevant and try and get your head on TV. I have a different view, and I think that the best thing you can be is look disciplined, strong and united as a team, and we've put steps in place for that well and truly, but also to be disciplined and values driven. And you mentioned third term. I've given a critique about how I see the handling of the media, but be under no illusion, I don't underestimate the Premier, either as the leader of her political movement or as a politician. I think she's a good politician, and electorally that's been proven. Now, she refers to me as the other guy. That's okay. This other guy will treat her with the respect she deserves. But that also involves calling out where I see hubris starting to creep in. And I'm seeing a lot of it, and politically I'm up to the task to highlight that. But it won't be me looking for the next headline. It'll be me showing a reformed centre-right political movement that people trust, and then that can lead to generational change we need.
The Premier likes to remind you that you're a Newman government minister. You must be relieved that he's quit the party now.
I've got no I've got no interest in launching war against anyone. That's not my style. But I'll make 2 points on that. The first is 50% of their election strategy for the last 3 elections has been focused on that. So I reckon there was one person very disappointed at the news, and that was the Labor strategists. What I will say is I sat in a room just over there and several hundred, nearing 1,000 people overwhelmingly voted for change in the organisation that I lead. And there will be some who choose to go a different direction, and that's okay. But what I saw in there was strong and united team, and that's been our failing as a side of politics. And I understand that that will be, some people won't embrace that, some people want to go in a different direction, and I'm not immune to criticism. I'll cop it from anyone. But I'm also energised by what happened, and I've got every faith that despite the fact that, as I said to my troops, we didn't win a single vote in there because no one's going to be casting a ballot in 2024 about the constitutional reform of the Liberal National Party. But it will give us a platform for them to look at us and say, these guys have got their stuff together for the first time in a long time.
One more question. You mentioned the need to cut through with women voters in Queensland. Yet a number, as you would say, talented candidates run at the 2020 election, which didn't get through. How do you increase their chances next round and cut through to 50% of the voting population?
Yeah, that's a good point. To say that we're going to identify good quality people like women in those winnable seats, it does a disservice to some of those good quality candidates who ran at the last election. And I should acknowledge that. There were some very good women who ran in seats who didn't get up. But what I want to do is make sure that we are ambitiously going to find people to put their hand up for pre-selection. Now, I'm not going to be going to those pre-selections and saying, I demand you vote for this person, but we have to identify people early, and we have to be serious about giving them the structure to come through and put their case forward for pre-selection. And as I said, it's not just women, it's also, there are other areas that as a political movement we've been deficient in. And ironically, one of them's in small business. Now, we are the party of small and family business. And in the week after the budget, and Tim Nichols is here, John Paul Langbrook's here, Sam O'Connor's here, Lockie Miller's here, every one of them went to different parts of the state. And we met over 200 small and family businesses and 2,000 of their staff because I want them to realise that they matter and that they care. But we haven't found a way of identifying people from small and family business and giving them the structure to run. That's been deficient. We haven't had people from multicultural communities. We haven't had an Indigenous Member of Parliament since Neville Bonner, in who we celebrated at the weekend. So we've got to find a way in Queensland to find people that represent the length and breadth of this state.
I'm going to throw to some of my colleagues up the back. I think it's Marlena Wapp up first.
Oh, g'day, Marlena Wapp from 7 News. Just touching on that about future candidates and how you're looking at getting more women and people from different backgrounds. I just want to hear more about practically how you're going to do it. The party couldn't keep a woman on as a leader, but how will you go about doing this in practical terms? Why won't you look at a quota system, for example?
As I said to you the other day, Marlena, when we sat down and had a chat about this, the Prime Minister hasn't ruled out quotas himself. So it's not something that I want to express an aggression towards. It's just that I think the best way to do it is to put your credibility on the line and say it's going to happen, and actively go and engage with people in different communities to make it happen. And I haven't just made an airy-fairy commitment to you today. I've said to you in the top 14 seats, so you can identify them. Number 1 is Bundaberg on 9 votes. That hurts to say. All the way down to Redcliffe at 6.1%. There's your top 14. So if in those top 14 I'm unable to identify 7 women candidates, someone from small business background, someone from multicultural communities. If I'm unable to do that, well then the electorate's going to hold me to account more so than any room of pre-selectors will. So again, I want grassroots members to be empowered to make a decision, as they were on the weekend. And you know, the executive that was put in place was driven by that membership. In a vote like I've never seen before, the mood for change, both constitutionally but also personnel, was strong, and that suggests to you the members felt empowered, and that's a good thing. But I'm going to be held accountable for that statement, because ultimately it's my decision to identify and make sure that those people are pre-selected, and I intend to fulfil it.
Hi, Rachel Rieger from the ABC. David, before the last election, the LNP said it would scrap the government's net zero emissions target by 2050 if it won government. Given the New South Wales government has adopted this policy, under your leadership and given you're reviewing the policy platform, do you commit to adopt a net zero by 2050 target?
Thanks, Rachel. We'll put forward a raft of environmental policies that show that we're fair income about it. But I'm going to start by saying a couple of things. And it's again on the lines of holding the government to account for some of its policies. Now, the government's made some commitments around that longer term. They've also made some commitments as to where they'll be by 2030. And when I look at the trajectory, I don't quite see a path of how they're going to get to that first commitment they've made. The government made a promise that 17% of the state would be protected area by now. We're currently just over 8%. Now, as Sam O'Connor will explain to you, in the last budget, some areas were set aside for protected areas, and we back that wholly and solely. It's good policy. But the amount that was announced increased our protected area in this state by 0.01%. So at that rate, we got 900 years before we get to 17%, despite committing to the United Nations we'd be there. Our emissions have gone up in the last 6 years. We equate a third of the emissions in Australia. So whilst I'm not going to give you what our policy is going to look like, I'm going to tell you that it'll be in the marketplace early, and it will be real and it will be tangible. And it won't walk away from our industries that are important to us, but there will be a clear shift. And I would argue, after a decade, of which it will be by that time, of a lot of targets that haven't been met and a lot of commitments that felt good but were never achievable, I'd like to think that environmentally we'll be able to portray what a true centre-right political movement can achieve.
Hi, Jack Mackay from the Courier Mail. You've spoken a lot about about service delivery. Are you comfortable with the current size of the Queensland public service, or do you think it's grown too big since the Palaszczuk government came to power?
Well, you only have to look at the rate of how it is increased, and you only have to look at what the government has done itself to try and stop that rate of increase to know that the increase has been unsustainable. But that doesn't mean that those people there don't deserve a job, and it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be valued, and it doesn't mean that your public service shouldn't be empowered to serve the public. So, contrary to what my political opponents will seek to portray, I've got no appetite for a cut and burn of the public service. But I tell you what I am going to do. I am going to empower them to feel like they matter. And we're going to make sure that the people at the front line are making decisions again. And the government will do all it can to portray changes made in the past that were done where people weren't treated with respect. But I also learnt a thing or two about that time, because I lost my seat. And do you know what I did after I lost my seat? I went and walked the floors of my two departments to say thank you to both of them. And it was the hardest thing I ever did, but I'm bloody glad I did. And in there was people from who I still today see. The Mayor of Ipswich was one of them, and people knew where her political leanings were. And the current member for Hervey Bay was another one who worked for that department, on both sides of the political spectrum, as well as a whole heap of apolitical public servants. But you can ask them what life was like under me as a minister. Absolutely, I gave direction, and I have no qualms in saying I was in charge of my department, the way a minister should be. But I treated them with respect. And I intend to make sure that I lead a public service that feels valued and respected and realise that their jobs are secure. But we're going to serve the public. And we've got a good-sized public service. And as I said to you, the government, by its own admissions, realised that it grew exponentially early on in its term, and as a result it's tried to do things to rein that back in. But it's one thing to rein in expenses into the future. It's another to give people job security, and that's what they deserve and that's what they're going to get.
Hey, Cormac Pearson from the Courier Mail. You've previously acknowledged the Labor Party's success at winning elections. What specifically can the LNP learn from these successes?
Strength and unity, which we've taken the path towards doing. Discipline, and making sure that our candidates reflect modern Queensland. The process of reform is going to be generationally beneficial for us. I believe that with every ounce of fibre I have, because without it, we would find the same situation where we would trip over ourselves in 3 years' time. So either we had the tough decision now and put everything and rolled everything on it, or eventually we'd still be tripping over ourselves. And make no mistake, when I talk about the Labor Party's success, it wasn't always that way. And the Labor Party, because of infighting and the split of the DLP, we all know where that led to a generation of them being in the wilderness. And it was Goss in the late 80s, the mid to late 80s, who began the reform of that Labor Party. Now, what that set up was a generation of governing. And I feel that we're in a similar position now. It's about making sure that there's a political movement that people feel empowered to be part of and want to join and want to serve, but more importantly, because there's a lot more Queenslanders that aren't members of political parties than are, more importantly, that people who aren't, those people who are looking at us, realise that we've got our structure in place to make sure that we can deliver for them the sort of government that they want. And that is a government that is prepared to reform, but will do it at a pace that takes people on a journey, that is prepared to make tough decisions, but will make sure that people are treated with respect, and is prepared to build a Queensland that serves all of them, where every single person feels valued. And that starts with getting your house in order. And we've taken the first step towards doing that.
Hello again. You said during your speech that relevance has never been more difficult and you're not going to change your style. But what else can you do differently to cut through during the pandemic, particularly when we see daily media conferences that are heavily focused on the pandemic?
I could say all manner of crazy things, Marlena, but in the end, that'll get me on the news, but it won't get me the respect that people want from their leadership. And when there is the daily updates, when there is people yearning for that information because it matters, I said at the start about those businesses, it's a little more than a passing interest for them. You know, the tourism operator who JP was talking to yesterday, who's gone from 150 passengers in her business pre-pandemic to 60 or 70 a few months ago. Yesterday had 2. Those updates, both interstate and here, they matter. So what I've got to do is make sure that we are speaking about things that are relevant to them, which is why during the pandemic I've consistently said if a government wants to take a decision for the greater good, if the decision is around lockdowns and border closures for the greater good, well then it shouldn't be one sector of the community that has to carry the can. And that one sector, as far as I can see, is many of those small and family businesses in those industries at the coalface. So we continue to say, and there is now a national framework that if after a lengthy period of time the Commonwealth will come in with some assistance. That's excellent. But that's after 7 days. And I can tell you, if we go into lockdown, there are businesses across this state who will hang up the keys and lock the door. It is lights out Irene. So we've got to have in place a structure that allows businesses that safety net. And whether that be for a deep cleaning support quickly so they can get back on their feet early, whether that be a support package to make sure that their perishables are met, costs there in the interim just to keep them, to tie them over, we've got to do that. So that's what I've been consistent about. Now, I know that hasn't filled your news bulletins, but it's made a portion of it. And that's what I want. I want people to look at us and say they're not seeking to be political grandstanders doing it, they're being true to their values and disciplined. And that is the greatest gift we can give people. From the government side, I would suggest giving health advice should come probably from Queensland Health at the same time as on the Premier's Twitter feed as well. And if that was to be occurring, I would say that people would feel confident that there's no political overlay with the messaging they're receiving. And in the same way, we will share that information in good faith, as all of our MPs are doing throughout their community, because this is a whole new normal and people need to know that that Team Maroon matters to all of them.
I've got a question on that. Just on the challenges of staying relevant in the pandemic. You previously said that you'll win and win big in 2024. Do you still stand by that? Are you still confident?
I am, and I've never been short of confidence. But I genuinely believe that because I think increasingly as people start looking at the government, they see that it's a government that doesn't know why it wants to exist. And they've had a series of election wins based on a raft of different reasons, and people can, you guys are commentators, I'm not, you can look at that. But I still believe that it doesn't know why it gets out of bed in the morning, and I've given you my vision of what a modern Queensland should look like. But I do think we'll win. And I actually think the bigger win will be in 2028, because there is a generation of Queenslanders who will see what it's like to have a government that empowers and unlocks some of those traditional industries by bringing new technology, and is aggressively looking to relocate businesses here, that is prepared to value the public service and treat them with respect, but empower them to make decisions. There will be a generation of people who see that in 2024 and like that, and then 2028, to steal a phrase, will be the sweetest win of all.
Hello again. David, there's been a lot of talk from the events of the weekend, and with Campbell Newman leaving, he has blamed MPs for the last 2 election losses. I know you said that there's been a big clean out, but how much responsibility do you and MPs have for the last few election losses and the conflicts within the party?
We all have to take responsibility, Rachel, and that includes me, because I sat around the shadow cabinet table and I've sat around the cabinet table. So you have to accept your wins and your losses, and you have to accept your portion of blame. There's no magic formula. There's no magic formula for us for electoral success other than to make sure we are reformed and we know our roles and responsibilities, we treat each other with respect, and then we develop the sort of policies that people want to see, delivered by people who look and sound like broader Queensland. That's what we have to do. So responsibility, we've all got a share of it. But in the end, we have to do better and we have to learn from it, because by the time of the next election, the Labor Party's been in power 30 of the last 35 years. We have won 1 election since 1986. Well, that's damning. That's damning. And when you consider the success that Krista and her colleagues have had at a BCC level, where they've continued to refresh, and you look at the Brisbane City councillors, they look and sound progressive and modern, and if you look at the success we've had federally, they've found a way through. So it's it's not Queensland, it's us, and I'm determined to make sure that we find a way through, and we will.
Hello again. You've previously indicated that you're not going to say how you'll vote on the VAD legislation until the committee report comes back. But can you explain to Queenslanders what your personal position on voluntary assisted dying is, or do you genuinely not have a personal position on the issue?
Jack, if I did that, you'd have every right to say, here we are, this guy's trying to heavy and impose his views after telling his troop there should be a conscience vote. And I'm not going to do that. And I am going to treat it with the respect and decency it deserves. And I'm going to call it for what it is. The whole process from before the election was politicised. It was. And the election's over now, and it's a topic that matters to people. And I am going to give my troops a genuine conscience vote. There's 7 or 8 of them in the room. I haven't spoken to any of them about how they should vote or how I'm going to vote. I'm going to give the committee the chance to do what it should do, and in a unicameral parliament, committee systems should work properly. I should have mentioned that as part of my reform. That's another thing we should be doing, is empowering those committees to work the way that they should have when they were set up. But the committee should go out and it should be listening to people, and people should have every opportunity to make their point of view and submissions, and they shouldn't be politicised, and people shouldn't be criticised for it, and I shouldn't be imposing my view on them. So when I make my decision, I'll be very clear about it. I will articulate exactly the reasons for or against. Until that time, every one of my troops know that they will be able to have a say according to their conscience, whether or not it's how they feel or their electorate feels, and they are never going to get heavied by me, before, during or after. And that's the standard I intend to set.
We'll wait to see how your decision pans out with that one. I think that legislation's going through in September. We're out of time. Can I thank you for your time, and can everyone please thank the Leader of the Opposition? Just quickly, I'd also like to acknowledge our naming partners, the Brisbane Airport Corporation, Dial Before You Dig, and also Griffith University. That concludes our luncheon. Thank you.